Hi everyone, welcome to the Akim Virtual Trek 2020 Part 5. Today we're going to continue up north into the Arava and look at some of the prehistory of the region and maybe have a little bit of fun as well. So let's go. Okay, we finished off the last section at Nahal Amram, that's here, and we're going to continue up Road 90 and our first stop will be in Samar. So here we go. You'll drive up and you'll pull over at the side of the road over here and walk into the field. And what are you going to see there? Well, you're not going to see much actually. You're going to see a couple of lines of rocks like this leading to what seems to be a pit at the end. Here's a schematic of it. This is known as a desert kite. And it was first seen from the air. In fact, they've seen many of them all through the Negev and some also on the other side of the Jordan. Question is, what are they and who built them? Well, in terms of who built them, archaeologists believe that they were made in the late Neolithic or early Chalcolithic period. We're talking about 6,000 or 7,000 years ago. And they were in use probably till about the end of the early Bronze period, which is 2300 BCE. That's about 4,500 years ago. It turns out that there, and we'll see a bit more later in this particular presentation, it turns out that during the end of the Neolithic period and the early Chalcolithic period, there was a large and thriving civilization in the southern Negev, in the Arava, and in the Beersheba Basin. Much more settlements than you'd see today. And we don't really know why. We don't know if the environment was more conducive, if the people had a better sense of living in the desert. But whatever the case was, we have uncovered many settlements and evidence of civilization during that period. Then about the year 2300 BCE, that's what's called the end of the early Bronze period and the start of the intermediate Bronze, something happened. We don't know what, but there was a general civilizational collapse in the area. That's not to say everyone died. There's still evidence of civilization, but the settlement pattern changed, and the big settlements like Arad disappeared. Maybe there was an environmental change. Maybe there was an earthquake. Maybe there was a disease, or maybe there was an invasion. We don't know. What's interesting in terms of biblical chronology is that period from 2300 BCE to 2000 BCE coincides more or less with what we would consider the time of Noah's flood. Now, I'm not saying that this is evidence of Noah's flood at all. What I'm saying is that perhaps Noah's flood and similar epics of disaster and destruction of civilization, that like the Gilgamesh epic and others in other cultures, that originated around this period, are cultural memory of some disaster that befell their civilizations at that time. Anyway, so we now know who built it and why they built it. They built it as an animal trap. And we know this also from the archaeological excavations of the site and the discovery of bones in the area. And frankly, what else could they be? Now, when they first saw these things, they thought that these walls were once perhaps higher and the animals would be herded into here and they would run down here and into an enclosure or a pit at the end where they would be captured and killed and eaten. What animals are we talking about, first of all? We're talking about the gazelle, which is still native to the area, and you can see around native herds, and the oryx, which is native to the area, but I think only can be seen in the Khaybar Yod Fatah presently. It's called the scimitar oryx because of the long scimitar-like horns that it has. Lovely animal. And here is a schematic of a kite, a typical desert kite. As I said, they used to think they would get the animals over here, give a yell, and they'd all go charging down into here and get caught. But when they tried it, it didn't work because they discovered that these guiding walls on the sides, which were several hundred meters long, were not very high. They were less than half a meter. And when they were built, they weren't any higher. That was their height. And the animals were quite happy to jump over them, even though these are not jumping animals. The gazelle is a running animal. They were nevertheless happy to jump over them and get away. So then they had a new theory, and that's the prevalent one today. And they tested it. And they tested it without even building walls, but by laying ribbons along the ground. they discovered that if they gently herded animals, they could get them to follow a guiding line. So what they think the way they think it worked was this: the hunters would get the animals into this area, perhaps by putting a bit of feed on the ground, make a bit of noise, gently move them in this direction. When they were near the end, and the wall would be a bit higher, they would scare them. The animals would stampede towards the end. Some of them, because of the scare, would die on the spot from an adrenaline spike and have a heart attack. Others would run forward and into the pit. The pit was part of a wadi in this case, and they just built a wall at the back of it. And they would break their legs, and others would pile up on top of them, or they would be captured and slaughtered. A crude but effective method of hunting. Anyway, so from the Desert Kite, we're going to just take a quick drive up past Yod Fatah, famous chocolate milk factory, sorry. If you look up on the ridge, you'll see the settlement of Shacharut. Actually, you won't see it because it's built just above the ridge. But on the ridge is another new resort called the Six Senses Resort, if anyone's heard of it. And if you haven't heard of it, it means you can't afford to stay there. Built in an environmentally friendly fashion. Again, a bit like the Bereshit in Mitzvah Ramon, and you cannot see it at all on the ridge. We're actually going to drive around and be on the other side of this ridge now. So we continue up 90. We get to Tzomet Keturah, with Kibbutz Lotan to our right. Then we turn left up 40. Drive up to Neot Smadar Junction. That's Neot Smadar, an interesting place to visit as well. And there's a lovely little Pundak Neot Smadar where you can get food, and they sell products from the kibbutz, great dates and drinks and wines and whatever. And then you're going to turn left on Road 12. And that's heading back south again, heading towards what was Uvda Air Base. Of course, Uvda Air Base doesn't take civilian flights anymore, ever since the new Ramon Eilat Air Base airport has opened up. Anyway, we're going to drive down Road 12 and take a left turning at Road 1011 to the Kasui Dunes. Now, the Kasui Dunes, as you'll see in this picture, this is Nachal Yitro, are the biggest dunes in Israel, much bigger than those near Ashdod, for anyone who's rolled down the ones in Ashdod. And it's a lovely thing to do with a family. It's a half an hour round walk, an hour, let's say, if you want to spend a time rolling up and down. The only thing you should note is this: don't do it in summer because the sand will get really hot, and the air will be very hot. And secondly, the dunes, unlike the ones in Ashdod, are not silicon. They're mostly calcium carbonate, which is basically chalk dust. So that if you're rolling down them, you're going to get really filthy. It's going to get into every nook and cranny. But it's a lot of fun for the family. Then we're going to drive on about another kilometre. And you can see it's actually parallel to the Israel National Trail, to what's known as the Leopard Temple. Now, in 1979, when Israel pulled out of the Sinai, they built, often the Americans did for us, new air bases and army bases in the southern Negev. And one of them was the Uvda Air Base. Now, before they built the air base and the army bases, they did an archaeological survey of the area and did some what they call salvage digs. And that's when they discovered the immensity of the settlement activity in the area. They found settlements, they found granary storage areas, and they found a temple. And this is it. This is an open temple dated to about 7,000 to 9,000 years ago. In other words, the end of what's called the Neolithic, that's the New Stone Age, or the Chalcolithic period, which we already talked about, which was from 4,600 to 3,500 BCE. So that's about 6,000 to 7,000 years ago. It's not very big. It's about 15 meters on each side. In one corner, that's this corner over here, they identified what they think was the Holy of Holies of this particular temple. By the way, there's another open temple above En Gedi, which is also quite famous. If anyone's ever gone to Nafal En Gedi, you can hike up and see it. Also from the Chalcolithic period. Anyway, in the Holy of Holies of this particular temple, they found in the corner standing stones. Now, what are standing stones? These are very small standing stones. If you go to Gezer, for instance, not far from Latrun, you can see standing stones that are 2 meters high from about 1500 BCE, the Canaanite period. And there's ones in Hatzor that they found in Megiddo and other places. These ones are very small, and they're often in pairs, meaning suggesting that one is a male and one is a female. And they usually signify either a deity, a god, or an event in history. For instance, in the Tanakh, we read a lot about matzevot. We read about how Yaakov built a matzevah after his dream at Luz, at Bethel. We read how Moshe Rabbeinu put up matzevot after he came down from Har Sinai, from Mount Sinai. And then in Kings and Chronicles, we read how the kings of Israel are told to take down the bamot, the high places, and the matzevot, the standing stones, because they were cultic sites and against the religion. Most of them did not do so, and that's why they were punished. So it's interesting to find these little matzevot here. But the temple itself was named not for the matzevot, but for these images that were found in the sand. Unfortunately, in 1988, an army tank went over a lot of the temple and these images and destroyed them greatly, and they had to be reconstructed by the archaeologist Uzi Avneri, who had excavated the site. Now, what you see, the high, big stones are the originals, and these small ones are actually reconstructions based on the earlier excavation. There are 17 images here of what they perceive as leopards. And how did they decide they were leopards? Well, because of the tails and because they had spots in them. See these spots? And there was one image, that's this one here. I'll see if I've got a better picture of it here. This is the leopards. And this is, they believe, an oryx or a gazelle. Why an oryx? Because of these scimitar horns like we saw in the picture earlier. All the leopards are facing east to the rising sun, which was a very common direction for temples to be facing. Churches face east as well. And this is the one non-leopard, the oryx, facing west. The question is, why did they bother building a temple to leopards? Perhaps it was because it was the apex predator in the area and they needed its good graces to survive. We don't know. We don't even know if they were leopards, but we believe they were. Now, if you can't be bothered schlepping all the way down to see the leopard temple, you can visit it at the Israel Museum. There's a very good display about the leopard temple, its layout, and some of the discoveries that were made there in the archaeological wing of the Israel Museum. Anyway, that's the trek for today. Hope you enjoyed it, and we will be continuing our way up north and talk a bit of geology at Har Ayat in the next session. See you later.